Music programs often focus on the classics. But what about other styles of music, student collaboration, and owning your own creative voice? In this episode, we'll dive deeper and talk to two music educators about their unique approach to string education. Welcome to Pass the Baton, Empowering Students in Music Education. Here, we amplify the voices of music teachers around the world who are passing the baton and creating environments where the music students are empowered. Together, we can help students transform from passive consumers to vibrant creatives. Welcome back to the Pass the Baton podcast. I'm Catherine Finch.
And I'm Teresa Hoover, and we're so glad that you're joining us today.
Yeah.
All right, so Catherine, we've been, going back and forth with today's guest, trying to schedule an interview for a little while now, and we finally got to talk to them. I thought it was incredible. What about you?
I feel like I have two awesome new friends.
Yes, absolutely. Taylor and Sara were it was really exciting to hear them talk about also different perspectives, right? They were here to talk about an extracurricular group that they work with, they run, but then also to hear about what they do during their day jobs, private teaching and teaching an orchestra. It was just really fascinating to think about music education and this idea of student ownership, student choice in all of those settings.
Mm-hmm. And I think Taylor is the one that said, how they think so much alike, but they also have very different perspectives sometimes.
Yeah.
And I reminded me of like you and me, like I that's why I love connecting with somebody and working with somebody, because there's so much that you bring to the table when the two of you think,
Yes.
or two or three, right? That you just get so much out of listening to somebody else's perspective and thoughts. And it really pushes your own thinking. So,
yeah, you're right. It's a good reminder about how important it is that we don't try to do this work alone. We find people who have similar values and similar mindsets and just work together.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we get to the interview, do you feel like you're drowning in lesson plans and wish that you had a musical support system in your corner? Well, grab your favorite mug, because we have just the thing for you, and that's the Pass the Baton Coffee Club.
For less than the cost of that fancy latte, you'll unlock a treasure trove of free resources. Get invited to our monthly planning parties, thank virtual coffee break with amazing lesson ideas, and score sweet discounts on music education goodies in our store.
Or if you just want to lend a hand to the Pass the Baton mission of empowering music teachers and music students, you can become a supporter, only $2 a month.
Think of it as a way to fuel your passion, elevate your teaching, and connect with a vibrant community of music educators.
So be sure to check out the link. It's in the show notes. You can learn more and you can join the coffee club today. You deserve it. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are excited to be joined by two guests today, Taylor Morris and Sara Deuce. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
We've been working to schedule this a while. Everybody's just so busy. But I was mentioning to Taylor and Sara before we started, you both did a presentation at AMEA that unfortunately I wasn't able to attend, but two different people came up to me afterwards and said how awesome it was and that we needed to make sure we connected. So I'm so glad that we've been able to make this work.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, can we start with both of you introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your background and role in music education?
Yeah.
Sure. So I grew up here in Arizona. I'm a native, and I played viola. I chose viola or rather the viola chose me, I guess I should say, in summer orchestra before fourth grade. And I played viola all through high school, and then came time to go to college, and I already knew that I wanted to be in education because I love teaching and thinking about teaching and understanding how people learn. And so I started as an ed major with a minor in music because I didn't want to let that go either. And then I settled on the combination of the two, music education, a couple of years in, and I loved it, and I've always loved it. I was introduced to fiddling in elementary and junior high. My teacher, my public school teacher, introduced me to it, and my friends and I loved doing it. And so I continued that in college, where I decided I wanted to join a country band. I'm a big 90s country fan. I think it's some of the best country music there is, and some of the best fiddle was in the 90s. And so I did, and played with a local band and had a great time. And I loved having some of that autonomy over the music. I mean, I did learn the parts that were important, Garth Brooks fiddle licks, but also got to add some other things. And I after I graduated, I started teaching, and this is actually my 25th year at Greenfield Junior High in Gilbert. So, yeah. And then, well, Taylor and I met in 2011, and in 2012 came together as co-founders with Martha Hughes of the Gilbert Town Fiddlers. And so I'm teaching junior high and have a lot of students, and I'm doing that, and then also exploring with the students in Gilbert Town Fiddlers.
Very cool. All right, Taylor, what about you?
Yeah, I similar to Sarah, I also got started in fourth grade in the public schools. I wanted to play cello, but the music store was out of cellos, and they sent me home with a violin. And I originally just started playing music and wanted to join orchestra because the orchestra teacher had made it look fun. And I thought, that looks like a great time. And then I kept playing because it was indeed a great time. And all through school, I was sort of like your stereotypical arts kid. I played some band instruments. I was in choir. I did all the plays and all the musicals. I was like that kid. But I never necessarily thought that I would go into music. I thought maybe I wanted to be a doctor, or maybe I wanted to be a lawyer, or I don't know. I had all these different interests. So when I went to college, I started out triple majoring because I don't know what I was thinking. And at a certain point, I realized that even though I was studying music education and biology and political science, the thing that brought me the most joy was music. So that was the point of halfway through my sophomore year in undergrad that I realized that music was what I wanted to like do and commit to. And the other thing that happened at that point in time, though, that was sort of interesting, especially in the context of this conversation about the work we're doing today, is that I started out as a music education major because I thought maybe I wanted to be a music teacher because I started teaching private lessons in ninth grade as a summer job. So I had loved private teaching and thought, oh, maybe I'll be an orchestra teacher one day. And then when I got into those classes and like really got into the work, I had this sort of realization that that was not what I wanted to do. That I couldn't see myself being an orchestra teacher in an orchestra classroom. Like that wasn't connecting with me in a way that I thought it might when I like first started out. So at that point I switched to performance. And then I was really fortunate after college to land a spot in a group called Barrage, which is what is Barrage? Barrage is a show that toured from 1996 through 2012, and I had first seen them when I was in seventh grade. They had a PBS special that was aired across the country, and Barrage it's a show with all violins, drums, bass, and guitar. All the music is non-classical, and it's all like choreographed, and it's all these different world styles, and I had been a fan of the group, and then I was really fortunate to get a spot in this group, and it was like literally like a dream job. Like 13-year-old Taylor was like, maybe one day I could play in this band, and then the band was like magically still around. So I spent the next 4 years out of undergrad touring full time with this group. I was on the road 40 weeks a year, and that was when I got really into learning about other styles of music. And actually, Sara and I both had the same teacher in middle school who introduced fiddling to us. Lou Felton is his name. And I had taken like a summer fiddling workshop with Lou. And so I had always been interested in fiddling. And then in Barrage, I was doing non-classical stuff all the time. That's what we were doing. So at that point, when I finished touring, that was when Sara and I met, and along with Martha Hughes, who she mentioned, and the three of us started the Gilbert Town Fiddlers together. So that's sort of my background. And then these days, in addition to the work with the Gilbert Town Fiddlers, I'm predominantly a private teacher. I'm also a Suzuki teacher. I have, well, I'm currently building my schedule for the fall, but I think right now I have 36 students ages 3 to 20 or something like that I see on a weekly basis, violin and fiddle. So yeah, that's my main thing is private teaching, and then all this work that we're doing with Gilbertown Fiddlers.
That's really cool. Before we get into like the meat of the interview, can you maybe give us a little more background about Gilbertown Fiddlers and just kind of what they do? Is that a good idea, you think?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. Okay, so I'll give you the quick elevator spiel. Gilbertown Fiddlers is an extracurricular youth development and music education program based in Gilbert. We are entering our 13th year as an organization, and we're in the process of becoming a nonprofit, which is very exciting. We have two programs right now. We have a group that's more for high school students and a group that's more for middle school students. The high school program was our original program. We're entering the third year of having a middle school group. And the work that we do is really centered in teaching our students the creative, collaborative skills that folk musicians have. So we're teaching them tunes by ear, we're teaching them chords, we're teaching them how to accompany, we're teaching them how to arrange, how to jam, how to improvise. All of that stuff that Sara and I wish that we had known when we were kids. We're creating a space for our students to learn and practice those skills. So it's a pretty unique organization in that all of the material that our students perform on gigs and on concerts is arranged by the students themselves. To our knowledge, all of the other high school fiddle groups that are in the country that we know of, either the director writes and arranges the music for the students, or they hire out someone else to write arrangements for the students. So yeah, as far as we know, we're the first group in the country who does this, and maybe the only one. There might be some other ones that are starting to do more stuff like this now. But yeah, that's a quick overview of how our students work.
And honestly, that's the kind of stuff that when I was hearing it and preparing for this interview, I was doing some research. I was reading your bios on the website. I was going through the notes that someone gave me from your presentation, and just little things like your presentation was called Fostering Contemporary Musicians, right? And like you said, the website is it just creativity, collaboration, ownership. I mean, like all of these things. And that's exactly what Catherine and I talk about on this podcast every week. We love it, but we just don't hear this coming from string ensembles too often. So it was so encouraging to see that from your work. And was it really just that because you said, you and Sara didn't have this as students? Is that where the interest and the passion came from? Or what do you think? What made you want to go this direction instead of kind of doing music the way we've always done music in schools, I should say?
Well, I can start with that.
Yeah.
When I was learning fiddle tunes from Lou Felton, there were a number of people that we were friends in that class, and we would hang out outside of class already. And then now we had these common tunes, and we would get together and try and figure out ways to make it different. It was just intriguing to us to try and find notes that would fit, or like harmony notes. And we didn't really do that in class necessarily. It was a lot of tune learning in class. But I had that desire to have some more and to do more. And we were pretty limited with our skills and our understanding. So it would end up looking like on a paper, okay, you're going to play the A section this many times, you're going to play B section, you're going to do this little shuffle thing, pretty simple. But that was something that I just wanted to do, even from a younger age, to be able to create in that way with my friends, I must add, because it was music is and was and always will be for me, especially very social. I had no desire to really create music on my own. I wanted to do it with other people. That's what brought me the joy and brings me the joy. But then there wasn't really an outlet for that. And, then when I got older and we went our separate ways and went off to college and whatnot, I didn't find that anymore. My friends had that desire also when we would do that, but then it didn't really carry on with them. And for me, even when I started teaching, I wanted to find ways to let students find that kind of experience, even in the strings classroom.
Yeah.
I think I would agree with everything Sarah said about like the friends being a part of it. That like having the space to connect with other people, I think was thrilling, and I think that that's something that we have seen in this program. For me, it was more of like an existential crisis, which was that when I was performing with this group Barrage, we referred to ourselves as fiddlers, and that term is a bit confusing because saying fiddle and saying fiddlers, that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But the quick summation is that like not all violinists are fiddlers and not all fiddlers are violinists, but a lot of folks use those words interchangeably, and this is something that only exists with the violin as an instrument. So like cellists who play different styles of music don't have this problem because a cellist is a cellist is a cellist. But I had this word fiddler that I was using to describe myself as a freelance musician and as a musician in general. And oftentimes when people hear fiddler, they assume that it means a set of things. And I did not have those skills. So I could sound like a fiddler. I knew how to not sound like a classical violinist when I was playing folk music, but I didn't know how to improvise. I didn't know how chords worked. I didn't know those things. And when I moved back to town after touring, people would pass my name around for gigs, and so I would get a call from like a singer-songwriter who would say like, "Hey, I hear you're a fiddler. Can you come like improvise some stuff on a set with me for an hour this weekend?" And I would be like, "Sure." I totally know how to improvise. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And so it was this weird thing for me of like having always loved this type of music as a kid, but not having had an opportunity to learn the skills that often go along with it. And so I had this slow realization in my 20s of like, oh, right, there is a whole world out there that is totally separate from the classical world, where these skills are taught from day one, they're valued from day one, and there's a whole host of professional music makers that spend their entire lives always living this way and never knowing how to read sheet music, never knowing like all of the things that in the sort of music education community that we think are foundational and fundamental. That's not to say that they aren't, but that is to say that that is a way to pursue music and to teach music, and that there are multiple ways. So I think that like Sarah had a lot of more experience with this stuff. I think Sarah, maybe like through college and stuff and like playing in the band, like you had started to develop some of those skills before you and I had met, and I was just starting to develop them. So when we came together and Martha approached us about starting this program, we were both like, well, things that we want to work on that we don't like, that we didn't necessarily feel like we had exposure to as kids or even as young professionals, were these other skills of like, how do you play in a band? How do you follow a chord chart? How do you do these types of things? Yeah. So I think that we were both coming from a place of like wanting to figure out how to do those things more for ourselves, and also how to incorporate them in an educational context for students.
Yeah. You bring up so many good points that, you know, we have this cute little box that we think this is what music education is, but yet music is so much more vast than that. And we don't always think about those other skills as being valid, but they really are. Like I'm similar to you, Taylor, in that I don't think, well, at least, or that you were, I don't think I could improvise well. I mean, sure, I can do it like in an elementary school classroom. And, you know, I'm not good at reading chord changes and like all of these things that I know that I'm not good at, but I can sight read, which that's a great skill if I'm going to go sub with a symphony, right? But not if someone wants to just sit down and jam. So yeah, I think we have to remember that there are so many valuable skills that can help students be musical, and we can do that in music education.
Yeah. So I'm really curious, like, so what does that student-led arranging look like that you'd mentioned earlier?
Okay. Well, excuse me. We where to start with this. Okay,
Yeah.
well, let's start at the beginning of a season when we have students who come in who are returning students, having been there one or a number of years, and then students who are new to this type of creation and this way of approaching music. And so we start with some foundational skills about how to create chords on the instrument and how to create some background grooves, which can be foreign if you're used to reading it on a page. It would sound different if a fiddler were to play it than someone who plays classical music. And so we get a little bit into that and just equip them with some of those skills of accompaniment. And then we teach the tunes by ear. And we have a repertoire that we have set for the year, and we have some main group tunes that the group is going to play as a whole. And then as the year goes on, students get the opportunity to play in smaller groups where sometimes we choose the tunes for them, other times they are choosing the tunes for their small group. But the large group tunes are what we start with, and we teach them by ear and teach the chords by ear. And eventually they do get sheet music just to solidify bowings and rhythms and notes that, they may have missed learning by ear in a large group. And then the overall picture is that it's a democratic process in that students suggest ideas and they sit down and talk about how should we start this tune, and how do you want to end this tune? What's the arch of this tune? What's the feeling you want to be in this arrangement? And often students will come with ideas, and even though we haven't really prepped them with anything. But sometimes they need more guidance, especially in our earlier years when we had smaller groups and students not as many returning students because it was a young group. And so we had to kind of help them with their idea bank so that they had some things to choose from, and then they could make their decisions. But now I'm astounded. I think Taylor would say the same thing at some of the ideas that these students come up with. I mean, they are consumers and listeners of music. And so their ideas come from who they listen to. And, they might just say, I like this chord progression happening in this rock tune. How can I do something similar in my tune that I'm arranging? And so they'll bring those ideas that they hear and come up with. And it becomes let's try this idea that so-and-so has, and a couple of people will give it a try and we'll listen to it. And I should say that at the beginning, Taylor and I are our one of our assistants, Cameron Baum, one year we had 3 arranging groups, so we were each like a coach over that group. So we would break out with a smaller number of students than the entire group arranging, which we have done before, but not as successfully as breaking out into slightly smaller groups. And so we kind of lead that discussion and chart the ideas and guide them in how do we execute this idea, and then do we like it? And so we guide them through how to work together to a certain extent with all these ideas and creativity that they have. And sometimes it comes down to a vote of who likes this idea versus this idea, and then majority rules. So in that way, it's a democratic process of coming to these arrangements. And just because they've made the idea up front, that doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. There's a lot of flexibility in creating these arrangements where we can come back to things and revisit things and say, well, this doesn't really work anymore. What should we do differently? So I would say we spend almost the entire first semester creating those big group arrangements. And then they are debuted at our event in December called Jingle Jams. And then in the spring semester, they do more arranging where they're really on their own. And by the end, it's really like, okay, go out, you've got your tune you picked, go do it. And we'll pop in to offer feedback and insight and whatever, but they're doing it. They're largely doing it on their own. Taylor, do you have anything to add?
I would just add everything that you're saying that was a great summation of like the year. And then something you said at the beginning that I think is important is that we have students who return to this program every year. And so those students, if they've already gone through a year, when they come back in the fall, Sarah was mentioning that like lots of them already have ideas, and it's generally the students who have been through the program once. That's not to say that new students don't have ideas, but that is to say that when you're learning these skills and you're learning how to make music this way, it's a real slow process. This is not something that like, like for any teachers who are listening that are like, oh, I might want to try some student-led arranging in my classroom. This is not the type of thing likely that you're going to go into your classroom tomorrow, you're going to teach your kids a tune, and right away the kids are going to have the ideas. They might have the facility to be able to execute an idea, but that doesn't mean that they're going to have the ideas. And I think that that's one of the things that we see in this work that's so important to us, is that those are different, and we find oftentimes when we're working, especially with like diverse groups of learners that have lots of different backgrounds, oftentimes the kids who are the most technically advanced are not the same as the kids who have the most creative ideas. And like oftentimes I'll like do workshops where I'll go into schools or different settings and I'll teach students tunes and things like this. And more often than not, it's the kid at the back of the second violins who's the one that raises their hand that says, ooh, I've got an idea for how we could start the tune. And the kids at the front of the first violins are just, they look like terrified by the idea of making a suggestion of how to do something. So in this process, one of the things that's so crucial is to understand that like before a student can have an idea, a student needs to have an opportunity to think. And they have to be prompted to think. And then there has to be space for them to share the idea. So, like this process that we're leading our students through, this democratic arranging, we're doing a lot of facilitating, but we're also in that process creating space for students to practice having ideas. And, part of that education from us is really focused on teaching our students a shared value system where it's like every idea is worth trying. We're going to try every idea. Just because an idea is suggested doesn't mean it's going to be functional. Just because an idea doesn't work the first time doesn't mean it's good, or it doesn't mean it's bad. Like sometimes you have to work with an idea, you have to try it 3 or 4 times, and then you're like, oh, okay. We have to like really create a culture around what it's like to test and try ideas. And part of that, one of the really like foundational things that we found that helps is that we tell students that when an idea is suggested, that idea no longer belongs to them, it belongs to the group. And so that way, if that student's idea is not chosen, hopefully it feels less like a personal attack of like, oh, well, like if Sarah suggests something, we don't want Sarah to go home feeling like no one liked her idea, but rather to understand that like just because an idea isn't chosen doesn't mean it's not good, or doesn't mean you couldn't use it later in the season in a different arrangement. So there's a lot of like education that happens around this work that is less about like, what is a melody? How do you play chords? How do you accompany? And a lot of it is like interpersonal, emotional, social stuff of trying to teach students how to think about themselves and their peers and their ideas and how to contribute and those types of things as well.
Yeah. There's so many things that are just like spinning around in my head. And I appreciate that you said, you can't just go and do this tomorrow, because there's a lot of groundwork that goes into it. And, Sarah, when you were describing the first semester, there's a ton of scaffolding. You're not telling the students what to do every step of the way, but you're there to help ensure that they're going to be successful. So when you do take that big step back, it sounds like they have the confidence that they can do it.
That's right. And
I love how you both described this place where students feel like they can make those suggestions. Obviously they have to. I think a lot of times when we think about ensembles, especially school-based ensembles, or I guess even professional ones, you do what the director tells you. You wouldn't dare suggest something differently. And I know when I've often asked my students, like, hey, what do you think about this? They do, like you said, Taylor, they just kind of stare at you. Like, well, what do you mean? What do I think? You tell me what to think. That's how this game works, right? So I love that you're creating that atmosphere where not only are their ideas, welcome, like they're expected. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
And just to give another example that maybe listeners can relate to, and Sarah and I talk about this a lot, like both in our own experience, but also with our students. of understanding that like your technical abilities are not the same as your creative abilities or your improvisational abilities or however you want to frame it. The thing that we think about is like we can listen to fiddlers that we really admire improvise solos. And I can listen to someone improvise a solo and I can think to myself, I can play that solo. But me being able to recreate that solo that someone else improvised is not the same thing as me being able to improvise that solo. And that there's like a weird disconnect there. And I think especially for professionals, you know, like who have been classically trained that are looking to expand their skills and go into new styles of music, it is really hard to separate your technical abilities from other types of skills. And so like we talk about that with our students. We're very open about this world that like you might be an all-state string player, but that doesn't necessarily equate to being able to do XYZ as proficiently right away as you can play your scales. Like those are related, but like it's not a fully like overlapping Venn diagram. And we see that our students start to value that. I'm thinking of one student in particular who told us recently that the thing that they love about our program is that they realized that they have a smaller, like they're really highly trained in a very small skill set of being a classical musician. And they love coming to GTF and realizing that like, oh, there's so many other ways that they can develop their musicianship. And that it's a big picture endeavor for us.
Yeah. I think for me, it just strikes me over and over about that you do have this big picture, you know, for the kids, but it's at the very beginning, it's very, like Teresa said, scaffold, but like I think because you have that goal for them, it's beautiful how at the beginning you kind of set them up for success, right? You have a very purposeful what you help them with so that you then can let go a little bit and let them do their own arranging, right? Because instead of like Teresa said, like the next day, like, all right, we're going to try this. And they have no vocabulary, they have no experience, right? You know, like, no, we don't do that to kids, right? We get ourselves involved in the activities and we're just doing them. And then we start to label them and then we start to do more difficult things. So I just love how you describe, Sarah, that whole process, and Taylor too. Just, yeah, it's great.
So I'm kind of curious because, you know, most of what you've been talking about, especially with the arranging, is through the Gilbertown Fiddlers, which is an extracurricular group, like you mentioned. But you both have day jobs as well, right? Sarah, you're an orchestra director. Taylor, you have your private students. How does it seep down into those roles? Like, do you see yourself incorporating similar ideas?
Yeah, sure. The thing that I find is back to sort of what I was talking about earlier about before a student has the capacity to make a choice, they have to have the capacity to think. And that as teachers, we have to find ways to support thinking. And I think a lot of private teachers, and I think a lot of, you know, musicians, if they think about their experience of being in private lessons, generally, I think private teaching is viewed as being like a top-down educational approach, where like you're coming to me for a lesson, I will tell you how to do these things, and I'm giving you this information. And that's certainly a part of it, right? You know, like that students have to learn skills, and as private teachers, we can help them build those skills faster. But when it comes to the student's experience in a lesson, the thing that I'm finding myself doing as much as I can is trying to get my students to think and develop self-awareness about what they are doing, which is the same thing that we're doing in Gilbertown Fiddlers in a group setting. But in a private lesson setting, it looks a little bit different, right? So an example might be that, you know, a student finishes a run through of a piece. The first thing I'm going to ask a student to do is I'm going to say, okay, take the pencil on the stand and mark down anything in your music that you want to remember before you forget. And the student marks something down. And then the next thing out of my mouth is like, what do you think? How'd that go? How'd you feel about that performance? And then I listen to what the student says, and then I follow their thinking. And I will always ask a student what they think about their playing before I tell them what I think, if I tell them at all. And I think that's kind of unusual in a private lesson setting. But there are like whole hour-long lessons that will go by, especially with like students who've been with me for a long period of time or more advanced high school students, where I will not once in an hour tell a student what I think of their playing, because I'm trying to develop, like, first and foremost, I'm trying to develop self-awareness, because how can you help yourself at home the other 6 days a week if you can't pay attention to what you're doing when you're doing it? And like that skill is the root of all the other things, right? So like it does, if a student keeps playing out of tune, the question becomes like, why are they out of tune? And then also like, do they know that they're playing out of tune? And they might not know that they're playing out of tune. So you telling a student to drop a finger in another place isn't going to result in any significant, meaningful, long-term change unless you get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem might just be that they can't hear that they're out of tune. So like before they can hear it, they need to be able to have an ability to listen. So I think that for me in a private lesson setting, like working one-on-one with students, this type of work is really just centered in this idea of like trying to develop a student's self-awareness. And then, longer term, or sort of like in a back and forth setting, I do a lot of playing fiddle tunes with my students, where we trade back and forth. Well, I'll play chords for them, and they'll play the tune, and then we'll switch, and they'll play the chords for me, and I'll play the tune. So there are a lot of ways that I incorporate elements of the like folk creative collaborative stuff that we do in Gilbertown Fiddlers in a private lesson setting. But I think for me, the root of it is really in the way that I approach teaching, that I think there's a lot of overlap there.
I'm picturing myself as like a freshman in high school having my first lesson with you and you saying, what do you think? And me trying to read your face to figure out what I
Oh my gosh, this could be a whole other podcast. It's really disorienting for students who come to me from other teachers, or who don't do a lot of question asking, or who have never had lessons before. And it's not uncommon that a student finishes the playthrough, I ask, what do you think? And the student just like freezes. Or they'll go, it was fine. And I'll say, great, tell me something you liked about it. And they'll go, and they like can't give me anything. Yeah. And then they'll say, isn't that your job? Aren't you supposed to tell me? And I'll say, well, yeah, but like if my job as a teacher is to help you, I need to know what you're noticing. And I can help you best when I know what you're noticing or what you're not happy with. That's how I can help you best. So this is how we're going to work together. But it's very disorienting for students. And regarding the face, if anyone's listening, and they're not watching this video, you can't see my face. But if you're watching the video, the way that I deliver these questions is with a really neutral expression, or with like a neutral positive expression. And I think Sarah, that's like similar when we're facilitating arranging in Gilbertown Fiddlers. It's very much just like, okay, what do you think? Awesome, great. What did you hear in this time through? We're never trying to. If students are concerned with what we are thinking, then that will take over everything for them internally. They'll be less concerned, like they're not gonna want to have their own ideas, because they're going to be so focused on trying to figure out what Sarah and I are thinking about what they're doing. So we both do a lot of work of figuring out how to develop things or deliver information with a neutral expression or with a neutral tone, or positive and encouraging, but like not leading. Especially because in an arranging process, there's not a right answer, right? So we have to be able to present things in that way.
And it's not our arrangement; it's we want it to be their arrangement. So if they're trying to please us and whatever our ideas are, then it's not their arrangement.
Yeah. And sometimes when they ask us what we think, we'll tell them, but sometimes we don't. or we'll just offer an observation of like, yeah, that idea was really great, but I do notice that it's hard for you to stay together. Like it kind of seems like, do y'all feel like it's falling apart when you get to the end? Okay, what ideas do people have about how you could make that feel more secure? Instead of us, like Sarah and I might in the moment be like, okay, the reason that this is not working is because the cellist is not playing the rhythm really accurately. Like sometimes we can perceive that. But if we tell them that, that's not giving them an opportunity to develop or notice why something isn't working, or come up with a solution for how it could work differently or more successfully.
I think with that too, when you tell them, right? I guess when if you listen instead of tell them, you really learn sometimes like just a hole in your teaching of like, oh, so and so was understanding it this way. And I didn't share information about this. So it's so valuable to listen and ask because if you had just told them and then that would have piece of information would have gone missing, it's really interesting to flip it a little bit.
So
Absolutely. Sarah, you should talk about how you do this stuff in your
yeah.
classroom because you have like other things that you do in your classroom context that are super related to all this
Sure.
too.
Can I have you repeat the question? Because now I want to make sure I stay in the vein of what you're asking.
Goodness, me too. I think we were just thinking about how some of these concepts and mindsets from what you do with Gilbertown Fiddlers has, integrated into your orchestra classes that you teach in school.
Okay. And that has looked very different over the past, not very different, but different. It's evolved over the 25 years. When I first started teaching, I was a junior high, but paired with elementary. And I'm so grateful to Lou Felton who is my junior high and elementary teacher, for introducing me to fiddling, because I wouldn't be obviously doing what I'm doing now, but I don't know that I would have discovered it any other way. And I wanted to bring that to my students. And in the elementary setting, it felt easier, maybe because they were not as steeped in the tradition of reading music. I haven't really analyzed that. Here, I'm doing it right now. And also they were smaller classes, and they were maybe more open to ideas. I don't know. Anyway, with my sixth graders, I decided to have them go on a tour to classrooms. And I don't remember, this might have been my second or third year of teaching. It wasn't right away, but I tried to do it early because it was intriguing to me, and I wished that I could have done something like that. So I wanted to give that to the students. And so I taught them, two basic tunes. It was probably like Cripple Creek and Boil the Cabbage Down, and a little bit of accompaniment, really, for them when they were creating their what I would now call creating arrangements. It was more me saying, here's some ideas, you choose from those. And that gave them some ownership, but they didn't have to come up with the ideas. And so then we would go around to classrooms and they would perform. And I just saw how excited they were to be able to share something that they had put together as a group. And it was simple, but the people who were listening didn't know that. And they were able to have a skill that nobody else in that room had. And that was really, I think, empowering to them to be like, whoa, we can do this and other people can't. And then it was just fun because the looks of the students in the second grade classroom and the fifth grade classroom and their peers and their teachers were just like, wow, how are you doing that? And so that was really rewarding. But it definitely was more, here's some ideas to choose from, make a choice from these. And then I've done it in the junior high, most especially now with a class that I created, I think in like 2017, maybe a little before that, that I call Advanced Ensemble, and the students audition to be in that. And so they're in their 8th grade orchestra and this advanced class. And that class really follows very similar things to Gilbertown Fiddlers, where we start the year with their learning fiddle tunes by ear, and they're learning chords and some of those basic skills, and they create a group arrangement that they perform at their first concert. And then, of course, we have other events that we perform for. So they're also learning sheet music, from the music, and memorizing things, and national anthem to play at assemblies and things like that. So they have to have a repertoire of that. But the culminating event or project is the fourth quarter, where they, having taken the skills that they've learned here and there throughout the year, they get into quartets, quintets, depends on the size of that advanced class. But generally it's between 14 and 18 students. So it's a smaller class where they can break out and work in small groups. My class of 50 8th graders last year, that wouldn't have been been practical to do that kind of thing where they're breaking out to work. I mean, I don't have the space, and it's just harder in a bigger class to get to everyone and have everyone gain those same skills. But they break out and they choose a pop tune, or they might choose Disney or whatever it is, and they arrange that for their string quintet or quartet. And nothing is written other than notes about I'm playing this when. And so it's all, they get to create it, and then they perform that. Each group plays at the final concert. So that is, I mean, that's a different class that's dedicated more towards that. As far as like incorporating it into my other large classes, 7th grade orchestra, 8th grade orchestra, I'll do some things. It's here and there. It's not something that takes over the curriculum, but it's like, I'm going to introduce you to these skills, and we'll do a little bit here and we'll do a little bit there. And some people take to it, and some people are like, just tell me what to play. But we'll do, I think I start out with Happy Birthday. And so I teach that by ear. And it's surprising how many of them can sing it, but then have really a hard time playing it. It's that C natural. It's that C natural. But then, and also that it's in 3. And well, we have a whole nother thing that we talk about with Happy Birthday and the pickup note and whatnot. But then we do a little bit with chords, but really it's more just trying to hear those chord changes by playing open strings, because you can play an open D, open G. And they can, it depends on the year and the school and the class, how much they buy into that and want to learn like some shuffle patterns, which again is harder to do in 3 than 4. But being able to try some of those chord changes or change up some rhythms and things like that. That's more how I broach it at the beginning in a large classroom, is changing rhythmic ideas, changing it, doing simple accompaniments. Maybe it depends on the tune that we're using, but maybe adding some notes or taking away notes. Just some of those simple ideas where they get some choice, and they will start to hear that oh, I did something different and I like that. Or I did something different and I didn't like that. Or that person did something that was really cool. What did they do? And so it just becomes something that's kind of sprinkled throughout rather than taking over the curriculum, I guess I would say.
Yeah. I appreciate hearing that. And I imagine other people will too, because what you're saying is you don't have to completely restructure everything you do. There are little ways that you can sprinkle it in, and you're helping students learn these skills and just be musical in different ways. That's really important.
Yeah. Something you said, Sarah, when you were talking about the younger group, it was almost easier with some of the ideas. I'm coming as a general music person. I'm like, yeah, because they're used to that. They're so like, my general music classroom is a lot of what you guys are talking about. I'm in the orth, or I use the orth method a lot, but it's really like, you have pieces that are like a skeleton. This is kind of how we're going to do it. But there are many times that as a class, we are talking and changing things and, arranging together in a way, basically. But yeah, like, so the kids that come to you for beginners in many general music classes are used to that kind of idea. So
thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah. That's my world. I love that world.
And I appreciate it. Yes.
Yeah. I think as ensemble people, we need to like take more from the general music, teachers, and just continue those skills.
Well, and also like when you're wondering where should I start, it seems like your beginners are a good place to start, because again, they're coming from that. So that's all they know, so it's a good place to just start and try some new things. Yeah. All right. So what should listeners try tomorrow? I know there's so many great ideas. What could you tell them if they wanted to try something tomorrow?
I think I would say that one of the easier steps is to teach something by ear. It's a different way of connecting with music and learning the music that students don't get as often, I think, as they're younger. They do, because they can't read the music yet. And so they're learning, and then learning how it sounds, and then seeing what it looks like. And then that kind of goes away as they develop skills. And I do a lot of demonstrating in class. Not as much let's learn from the beginning by ear. And rather than like, let's memorize this and then it'll be in our brain, but no, let's not even look at the music. And when I've done that with the 8th graders in my program in the advanced ensemble, and then I give them the music, they're like, I don't know what that is. That can't be what I'm playing. That looks foreign to me. I can't even look at that. I'm going to mess up because they have a different relationship with those notes and that tune. And I would say that something simple, because there will be plenty who are not successful even at learning by ear the first time. They may resist it, but it's okay. It's okay to do hard things and to have to be brave and try something that's hard. I had a student this year that, or I guess it was a former student, and she came back and she was telling other students. I said, well, tell these new students something that you think they should know about advanced ensemble that you're going to be in next year, and like share some of that. And she was like, it's okay to cry. She's like, I went home the first week and cried every day. And I was like, oh, okay. Thank you for sharing. And then she's like, and learning by ear is still really hard for me, but it's easier. And she was specifically crying about having to learn by ear because she was noticing the people around her who were getting it, right away. And it was hard for her. But that's not the only skill that we did in that class. So she found other places that she felt more secure. But she was like, I'm so glad I did this class. This is the best thing ever. But I did cry the first week. And I was like, that's valid. That's fair. I think Taylor and I would both say that he's gone to more fiddle camps than I have, but both of us at fiddle camps cry often, even now, because it's hard. It's new and it's hard, and it's hard to be vulnerable and to, what we would say, fail at something when you're trying it. But it's valuable and we grow from it.
If I was going to give one thing that someone could try tomorrow, this is why I love working with Sara, because Sara and I, like, our brains, the Venn diagram of the things that Sara and I value in this space is so overlapped. But our brains go totally different directions. Like 10 out of 10 recommend teaching by ear is like an easy thing that you could do tomorrow. And I'm inclined to offer as a piece of advice for anyone who hasn't done this type of work is to recognize that, like, you don't have to be an incredible improviser to teach improvising. You don't have to be an incredible arranger to teach arranging. You don't have to be an incredible instrumentalist to teach an instrument. And I think the more trained we are, the more we feel like, oh, I can't go into this teaching experience until I fully know it as a learner. Mm-hmm. But if there's anything that I've seen from my experience as a private teacher, it's that you basically just need to be like 1 to 2 steps ahead of the child. Because, like, if you're doing introductory improvisation stuff, I'm not going to be like, if I'm teaching a 6th grader how to improvise for the first time, I'm not going to whip out my fanciest improvisational skills in front of them when I'm demoing what it looks like. I'm going to whip out things that are like at their ability level, right, so that they can hear me improvise with 3 notes, something that they think to themselves, oh, I could do that. So I'm inclined to just offer that as a piece of advice, is like, you don't have to be so far, down the road with these things to start doing them. But in terms of something you could do tomorrow, I think the first thing I would encourage the teacher to do is to pay attention to how many opportunities they are giving their students to make choices. And just to start to notice that, like, from a student perspective in your classroom or in your lessons or whatever it might be, how often is that student getting a chance to exercise some sort of choice or autonomy? And it doesn't have to be a lot, but my feeling is that the more autonomy you give kids, the more they enjoy what they're doing, and the better they learn, the better they retain, the better they participate, the better they engage. Like, it really flips the model. And so that could look like a lot of different things. Like, it could just be like, what order should we do things in class today? It could be, does anyone want to get up and lead tuning? Does anyone, like, there's so many ways that you could give students choice in a classroom setting or in a lesson setting that don't necessarily have to look like arranging. But if you want students to be able to have ownership, you have to give them choices. So I would just encourage teachers tomorrow in their classrooms or in their lessons to just track how many times are you giving an opportunity to make a choice, and then are you following through with that? Because it's one thing to be like, what do you want to do? And then a student suggests something and you're like, I don't want to do it that way. I'm gonna do it that way later. Like that, that's not setting you up for success. So that would be the thing I would encourage someone to try tomorrow.
Yeah, that's great.
All right. Well, this has been just incredible hearing all of these wonderful things and then from so many different perspectives between the extracurricular group, in school, private lessons. It's awesome. If people wanted to connect with you and learn more about what's going on, how could they do that? Yeah,
Gilbertown Fiddlers is on the social media platforms. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. Sarah's holding up her Gilbertown Fiddlers mug that we're both drinking out of. Oh, we need to develop a merch page on our website.
I've been talking about
it. But on all the things, we're at Gilbertown Fiddlers. And then our website as well as gilbertownfiddlers.com. So you can learn more about our program there. I also on Instagram am at Taylor Morris Music, and I post lots of different teaching related content and fiddle related content and things like that that folks can check out. Sarah, do you have other?
I'm Sara Deuce Viola on Instagram, but I do not post a whole bunch of things. I post more on Facebook, but I am not on social media as much. Yeah. But you can still reach me there.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time. We appreciate it. It was, everything we hoped and more.
I can see why people, talk to you, Teresa. We're like, you got to talk.
Exactly.
Please do.
Yep.
I'm so glad they said that.
For the opportunity to share and hang out with you today. This has been fun.
Thank you so much. It's been awesome.
Thanks for joining us. If you have found value in our conversation, please hit that like button, subscribe to our podcast, and leave a review. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us grow our community of passionate music educators.